be doing first with our mushrooms is doing an underpainting. So underpaintings are basically where a lot of times you're just using one color and you have different values of that color. It's mostly called a grisaille if it's black and white. Normally an underpainting is like a sepia tone where you tone the whole thing and then you start lifting out your lighter values, things like that. So we're gonna do something similar to that, but instead of using one color, we're gonna be kind of doing color blocking. So we're gonna thin down our oil paint and block in like the red. We're gonna block in some green. And then like I said, if we have time, then we'll start going thicker with our layers. So with oil paint, we thin down with our solvent, which I'm using Gamsol, which is mineral spirits, or sometimes people use like terpenoid. Way back, people used to use turpentine, which wasn't the greatest. Now oil paint is way more healthy to use. And actually with all the plastics, acrylic is actually more, I guess, hazardous than oil paint is, because oil paint is mostly just oil and the pigment. You do have to be careful just with paint safety with any type of paint or pastel. When it's in a dry form and you breathe it in, that's when it can be a little dangerous. So like if I had paint on a glass palette and it dried and I'm trying to scrape it up, you would want to be careful not to breathe that in. So if it's, most normal paints are totally fine. It's mostly just like cadmium red if it's made with real cadmium, which a lot of companies are starting to get rid of that. Or some people want to paint like the masters, so they're trying to find like lead white, which obviously lead isn't the healthiest thing in the world. So anyway, we're going to be using solvent to thin down, because in your early layers with oil paint, you use solvent. But in your later layers, like let's say next week, we wanted to layer some thin colors on top, I would want to instead use like liquid or the solvent-free gel or something like that, because the solvent in later stages will actually remove paint on previous layers. So what I'm going to be using is a flat brush. So flat brushes come in lots of different sizes. This one is pretty big comparatively to my painting. It's not like a super large brush. It's kind of a medium size. And I'm painting a 5x7 canvas, so you can kind of see the difference on mine. You may have to use a slightly bigger brush for yours. And what I'm going to be doing is taking a little bit of solvent. I'm just kind of tiptoeing in my paint. And I'm going to start off first with thinning down my my burnt sienna. Okay, like that. Now you want this to be thin enough that it moves pretty easy, but you don't want it so runny that it's too transparent, because the solvent will actually also eat away at your pencil marks. So I'm going to have it about that consistency. And then I'm just going to be doing basically a base layer on the stems or stalks of my mushroom. So now the next thing before I start doing anything more to the brown is I want to also go ahead and grab some alizarin crimson. So alizarin crimson is a pinky red, so it's one of our cooler reds. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. And I'm going to go ahead and do a base layer on my mushroom. Now, after y'all do this part, what we also want to do is do what's called lifting. So the lifting is basically where you can take a paper towel or a baby wipe and you're actually going to be lifting out highlights, or even a Q-tip. So I can take this and say, okay, it looks like most of my light is coming from up above. So I'm going to take this. See, and just erasing it a little bit. So this helps us to practice seeing the values in our painting, as well as helps to have a nice like underlayer to our painting. Now, if I have any paint that's dried and it's like, oh gosh, I can't lift this, then you could always take a paintbrush and put a little bit of solvent on it and use that to lift up. So like some of the lighter spots on my mushroom I'm gonna lift. It's not gonna be as light though as like the top of the mushroom, just because, you know, the caps are casting a bit of a shadow. So next, what we're gonna start doing is when you're doing an underlayer like this, if you wanna go back and make something darker, then instead of using the solvent, a lot of times you just use paint or use less solvent. Because with oil, like I said, you go thin to thick. So if I wanted to start adding a little bit of a shadow underneath the mushroom cap, then I'm gonna take my burnt sienna and I'm taking from the side. Then I'm gonna take a tiny bit of our blue, and that's gonna make kind of like a brownish gray. And then I'm gonna put that underneath the mushroom cap. And then a little bit to the side. And then if you need to blend it, you know, a lot of underpaintings are gonna be a little messy, and that's okay. But to blend it, you could always just take a clean brush and just kind of pull it like that. And that's, you know, good enough. I'm gonna put some over here.
Sorry, it was just burnt sienna?
Burnt sienna and a little bit of blue. Because basically burnt sienna is like an orange and then blue is the opposite, so it helps to tone it down. And then next, what we can start doing is blocking in some of our background. Now our background in the reference picture is just a lot of different greens, which we're gonna kind of replicate that, but if you want to change it at all, that's perfectly fine. Like there's also some leaves kind of crumpled around. You don't necessarily have to put that in. That's kind of a choice you have to make when you're working from a photo reference. It's just what's most important about the picture, or you know, what actually is going to be affecting our subject. So for the greens, what I'm going to do is thin down my paint again, which has a little red on it. That's okay. And I'm going to start with yellow and add a little bit of blue, because blue can overtake yellow pretty easily, just because yellow is a bit of a weaker color compared to blue. So I'm going to make kind of just a basic green, and then I also want to have a darker green. So I'll add some brown and a little bit more blue. And basically what I'm going to do with this is just go over my background, switching between the greens. I could also take a little yellow.
Okay, you use solvent, right?
Yeah, just a little solvent. And when I get close to the mushrooms, I'm gonna go up with the edge of my brush and then pull it away so I don't have like an awkward outline.
And leave the space at the bottom.
Yeah. So I'm going around on my mushroom. And then at the bottom, I'm just gonna go with a darker green. Just because things get a little bit darker as they come forward. And then that's it for this stage of the painting. And then once this is dry, next week, we're gonna come back and start working on our mushrooms, shading them more, and then if we have time, we'll also start on the background.
So I just do the